Hello, viewers. We are back with another episode of the Semiconductor Podcast. And today we have our guest, John Ghekiere, is the principal and founder of TechSovereign Partners, a consulting firm that helps semiconductor manufacturers and equipment OEMs solve through problem fast. Drawing on a network of deeply experienced technologists across the key fab disciplines, the firm works with the manufacturers worldwide to stabilize performance, resolve yield issues, and guide critical decisions around tool strategy and manufacturing readiness. Before founding Tech Sovereign, John held senior technical and executive roles at Semitool, Applied Materials, and Class 1 Technology. So this is the introduction of our guest today, and over to you, John. Today's first question. First of all, you are welcome to the Tech Simplified TV podcast, that is the TSP, the Semiconductor Podcast, and we are right now live with our audience. So first question towards you is, John, you have had a long dynamic career in semiconductors. Can you walk us through your professional journey from early roles to founding Tech Sovereign Partners? Over to you.
Yes, Raju, thank you for welcoming me to join the podcast. I'm excited about it. You mentioned part of that background in the introduction. I started my career at a company that maybe some of your viewers do or don't recall, Semitool. Semitool is actually the inventor of the SRD. So SRD is in every fab around the world, and that's where it started. I was lucky to start my career there. A very innovative company, equipment company. I got to be part of a lot of really excellent innovations in the industry, including early introduction of copper damascene into the industry. In 2009, Applied Materials acquired Semitool, and I stayed on after that. So 10 years at Semitool, another approximately 10 with Applied Materials, and of course, the two companies very divergent in their personality and their size and their approach to equipment manufacture. And then in 2018, I left Applied Materials to go over to a small equipment company called Class 1 Technology. Class 1 Technology was formed in about 2013, and their place in the industry is they developed a new plating system really meant for the smaller fabs, the smaller wafer manufacturers. I was there for almost 6 years, and then I founded TechSovereign Partners in 2024 to go serve fabs directly.
Oh, okay. That's a great journey of yours. And we have a mixed level of viewers. That means we have freshers, 2 to 3 year experience, as well as after starting this podcast, we do have CEO, CXO level peoples watching this podcast either live or replay later on.
Yes.
So, my next question towards you is the what key experiences shaped your perspective on the challenges and opportunities in the semiconductor industry?
Yeah, great question, and thank you. You know, early in my career, I was fortunate enough to be able to spend quite a lot of time in TSMC's fabs, particularly in Hsinchu. And so, in a sense, I got a really nice perspective of the growth and the maturing of TSMC. They're a very different company back then. Of course, they took more risks. They moved very quickly. They were still trying to differentiate themselves in a pretty tough market. Today, we know that they're very dominant, not just dominant as a manufacturer, but dominant as a technology provider. And that wasn't the obvious case back then. And so to see that growth was quite informative for me. You look at a TSMC now, and they're at the very bleeding edge of technology development, which means that they're pushing the bounds of physics itself. not all fabs are pushing the bounds of physics. And what you see then is that you can get a bit of an, I would say, almost identity crisis for some fabs in that there's a little bit more of a manufacturing bent for certain types of fabs, an RF fab, a MEMS fab. They don't necessarily push the bounds of physics. And so seeing that shift in time with TSMC and looking at mature node fabs today has really shown me that we're, in a sense, even globally, sort of losing a sense of that underlying manufacturing prowess in the industry.
Great to know, for me as well as for the viewers.
Yes.
So I'll move on to the next question. That is, what inspired the name TechSovereign Partners, and how does it reflect your mission?
Yeah, TechSovereign Partners. It really comes from, I remember this moment just not too many years ago when I first really encountered the term technology sovereignty and the topic of technology sovereignty. And I found it at the time a little shocking. I was aware that certain nations in the world, their leadership, they worry about things like food sovereignty. They worry about things like military sovereignty. And it's really critical to the freedom of a nation in deciding its own future for its own people, its own citizens, that, number one, if you can't feed your people independent from the influence of other nations, it's hard to believe that you're truly free to carve your own path. And similar, military sovereignty, if you can't protect yourself, if you can't defend yourself, it's hard to imagine that you're truly a sovereign state. And so those are really important to prime ministers, presidents, leaders of independent nations. Well, now we really and truly live in an era where technology sovereignty enters that same conversation, where in effect, if you don't, as a nation, if you don't have a grasp on semiconductor technology in particular, if you don't have a really firm place to play in that ecosystem, you as a nation become a little bit at risk of making your own decisions. You become sort of dependent on other nations in that aspect. And that really stuck with me. When I began to examine the prospect of going out independently to work with fabs, I had a similar thing in mind because there's been a lot of lost knowledge over, I would say, the past 15 years or so. You see a lot of very knowledgeable people retiring, getting hired into other industries, in some cases just being laid off, and you have a mass loss in knowledge inside the fab. And that constrains the fab in a similar way to a nation not having access to its own ecosystem. So I've quite a few clients that I've engaged with even before I formed TechSovereign Partners, where that loss of knowledge, it hindered their progress in the marketplace. It lowered their margins, it slowed down their innovation. And so I named the company TechSovereign Partners because I want very much to go and bring that enabling knowledge back. In many cases, we're talking about knowledge developed maybe 10 or 15 years ago. And my interest would be in bringing that back so that fabs can really own their own future.
Yes, I would like to add one comment here.
Please.
When I worked in the industry, right, I checked that the textbook knowledge is just 20%. And there is a lot more thing which comes from the working experience. And as you have said, I can correlate very easily. When a person he is working, right, he is a very, very much live knowledge database. And if
I like that, yeah, that's right.
Yeah, yes, live knowledge database. That means your human mind is a very complex structure for storing informations, right? Even if you try to access it by sequence, the knowledge, you will not get. However, certainly at point of crisis, the mind says, "Oh, we have that thing, did that thing in that point of time. We can utilize that in this situation."
Yes,
So the mind works like that, and that's why human heads are not just head counts. Every human being working in the high tech field is a live knowledge database. Even
absolutely. I'm going to steal that. Yeah, live knowledge database. You're right.
yes, and that's why, okay, that's why whenever somebody is working on a project, right, in a live say manufacturing, designing, anywhere, that person actually is having a zipped knowledge like WinZip or like that
Right.
WinRAR. Yeah, that a zipped knowledge in his brain. And suddenly at some point when working, some trouble is coming, and in the entire team jumps on to the troubleshooting, and somebody opens up his zip and or unrar his knowledge database, and one solution comes out of that. Just check, this
Yes.
can be applied. So uh, even though we have no we have way of archiving knowledge through computer files, it could be text, it could be slides, it could be video or anything. Human mind is much more complex data structure. I can comment over to any data structure that has been built whatsoever. So it stores knowledge in a way that no other data structure can store.
Oh,
If I
I
give a
could
way,
not agree more.
yeah, because one very simple example I give. When we listen to music, right, we actually patch that music with that particular time. Say at year 1995, I am hearing a music, and that time my life is going through some phases. At year 2025, when I am listening to that the same music, the same patch of my life comes back in my from my memory lane.
Right.
How does that happen? It's a linked list, but we cannot define that linked list in a way in our even in modern data structure. Even we do not know that exists. That's why music help peoples to go and have happy moments, because generally people have their happy moments associated with music, associated with cultural events, good movies, etc., etc., whatever means. Or if someone can play acoustic instrument like guitar or something or violin, they play that. So my point was that human mind stores in a very complex manner the data, a linked list that I think modern data structures even cannot replicate. uh, and that's why human assets to a company, right, they are much more than what you can have in your hard disk, whatever you can have in your papers, or maybe in CDs, or maybe in your video files or audio files.
Absolutely. I mean, gosh, we could have a long podcast on just that topic. And those are really great insights. You said many things better than, because I've been complaining about this for a while. And it materializes in these really unfortunate ways. I think mentorship is a big part of that. You're talking about the
Yes.
complexities of how your mind uh, gathers and collects and stores that information, plus the processes of retrieval. Right, they're all very complex. Well, we have a really it's a big challenge, but it actually has a really simple solution: mentorship.
Yes.
Senior engineer working with junior engineer, and it's such a pity, almost a crime, that there is such a movement to replace that mentorship with college courses and training modules and written documentation, and all those things are very, very good. In fact, I'm very excited to see how many universities worldwide are now developing really useful and really practical coursework for semiconductor. It is
Yes.
good, but it doesn't and can't replace that mentorship. I've started talking about this like choosing between bicycle tires. Do you we'll
Yeah,
take
yeah,
the
go
front
ahead.
tire instead of the back tire. Well, you can take either tire, You don't have a bicycle if both tires aren't there. If you say we're going to focus on training, it's good. You need training, but without mentorship and onboarding, I don't know how your young engineers are ever going to come up to speed. And vice versa. If you don't write anything down, if you don't train anybody, it's a different sort of failure. And I agree. The industry has really largely shifted to I would say, too much of an academic view of what semiconductor is. In the late 1800s is when electricity was being developed and rolled out to cities and to homes, and it was among the highest technology known to mankind. In fact, they weren't even really sure what electricity was. But today, I can wire my own house because I could capture all that knowledge. And it takes a long time to put all that knowledge into a box to be able to hand it off. And semiconductor pushing the very bounds of physics, it's hard to package every single thing into something that somebody can just download. USB port on the side of our head is not a thing today. It's not a thing.
Yeah, that's why that is one philosophy. I understood this because in our channel we have very small topics. Say we can say the basics things, very basic things, as a learning material that we publish as our regular videos. And in addition to that, uh, starting this the Semiconductor podcast was to bring real people who are the real heroes. They have real work, real challenges, and real wins, not the silver screen, which is totally curated. Okay, so that's why we are bringing one by one real-time heroes and real unsung heroes to this platform, and talking to them, getting their views, and these views are priceless. I cannot even compare it with money. These views are priceless. And and the motive is that the basic tutorials that we go through in our channel covers the 20% of the knowledge, and to jump into the unknown, right, that is the 80%, which is the riskier part. We have the TSP, that is the podcast right now we are running through, so that people can share many of their views, like we discussed just now, about having the human experiences. Yes, it's true, because the experiences does matter. And if you go to any company will say you are replaceable. Yes, as a human count or head count, you are replaceable. However, each person, right, in his life has a unique journey. Even if we confine to the technical journey in his technical working life, that is unique. And no two persons, I again emphasize, no two persons have the same technical knowledge experience throughout his career. I think you are the 25th guest of TSP. Before that, we have 24 different guests from different fields, and none had the same journey. Everyone's journey is very much unique, very much unique. They said a lot of things, and those are very much valuable. Today we are having a discussion, you as a 25th guest, and it is a landmark for TSP having you in the 25th guest. Obviously it is not 25th episode. For one guest there was a power cut and we have to redo the episode on the next week, so it is 26th episode. However, you are the 25th guest.
Excellent.
And yeah, so it's on a landmark. Today TSP reached the 25th person as a guest, and with I'll be cutting down my words. I'll move over to the next question.
Please, okay.
Technology sovereignty as being crucial as food and military power. What does sovereignty mean in semiconductor context?
Yeah, I think if you look globally, it has when with COVID-19, and then in that same time frame, a lot of escalations in global tensions, not strictly focused on semiconductor, but really largely focused on semiconductor. It became very obvious just how globally distributed the supply chain was, and because of that, just how frail it turned out to be. I mean, cars couldn't be shipped to car lots couldn't be purchased because they were missing chips, of all things. It's incredible. So now we know. And so at that global scale, nations want, and it's understandable why they want to onshore or near shore some substantial portion of that ecosystem. And we can argue about how much of that is practical, but it's clear that that's the desire. Within a given player, within a given fab, the story isn't terribly dissimilar. You have to be able to own and command and master a certain degree of core competency to be competitive. Now, it doesn't mean you have to be perfectly vertically integrated entirely. I honestly believe that part of what the industry needs to do is embrace collaboration more readily. There's a level of secrecy that I encounter quite often that isn't really secret. There are certain integration schemes that multiple fabs use, and it's relatively widely known, and certain collaborations around those collaborations with third-party knowledge bases, and companies like mine, consultancies, where you can enable something quickly so that you can keep moving. Like I say a lot, let the easy things be easy. I encounter a lot of fabs that want to implement TSV. Well, TSV through silicon vias, very tall features filled with copper, is very complicated. It's very complicated, from the etch to the PVD to the plating in the CMP is all very complicated. But it was all figured out about 10 or 15 years ago. So that should be something you just implement. And so tech sovereignty in the fab means go and invent the things that need invented. Focus your PhD efforts and material science efforts into the new materials, like use of silicon carbide or gallium nitride and some of or glass, right? There's a lot of glass. But when it comes to these aspects of your process integration that were figured out 10 or 15 years ago, if you don't know how to do it, go get somebody who knows how to do it, and then you implement it, and then you can roll forward. And in my mind, that's going to be the fastest way for companies to find their freedom within the industry.
Okay. Great to hear about this. Yeah. Great. So it takes a lot to encapsulate the knowledge. Great. And I'll move over to the next question. That how do you see nations like India or emerging economies build a sovereign semiconductor capability realistically?
I think my personal opinion is a nation like India is in a really great spot to be successful. And not that it's going to be easy. It's going to be really, really hard and fraught with risk. Also failures. There's going to be multiple setbacks. I already saw reports that some fab plans have been scaled back or slowed. That's going to be natural when you have a really ambitious goal like India has. I think the advantage that a country like India or other developing countries will have is that the nature of your industrialization has very much to do with manufacturing, and it's high efficiency manufacturing because some of the margins are not very high, textiles and what have you. So you have to be really, really good at manufacturing. Then when you're already really good at manufacturing and you layer something on top of that, like the technology of semiconductor, which you really can learn through university studies. I think India has many PhDs and really excellent programs in the sciences. Now that technology aspect is a very valuable layer, which you can come up to speed on, I think, quite quickly, layered on top of a bedrock of deep know-how and muscle memory in manufacturing. In the West, I would say in Europe and North America and elsewhere, that bedrock of manufacturing is what has been slowing companies down. You can even look at the difference between the separation between TSMC and Intel as an example. It isn't that Intel quit doing technology or quit spending money on development. They absolutely did. Their backside power, some of their gate technologies are absolutely world class. Where they slipped is in the execution, in the manufacturing, in keeping up with rolling those features out reliably. And so I think countries like India are well positioned because you have that bedrock in place.
Great to know about all your views and angles of how you are seeing this. Great to know, and I
Mhm.
also resonate with your thought. And I will be moving over to the next question.
Please, yeah.
It's about the mature nodes.
Hmm.
What role do the mature node fabs play in achieving national sovereignty, and why are they often overlooked?
Yeah, mature node fabs, they have my heart now. I mean, it's really why I quit a steady job and went to start a company. The mature node fabs absolutely get overlooked, and I think it makes sense. It's because what they do tends to be a bit boring to everyday people, right? For the longest time, if you knew anything at all about a computer chip, it was because of Intel, and you were getting a new gaming laptop, and the latest processor, the latest Pentium was on your mind, and you would go buy a laptop when it came out. And then quickly after that, it was smartphones, and people would line up for the latest Apple, the latest iPhone. And so it was the consumer technology that was really driving the knowledge and interest in the industry and where the excitement came from. If you look to now, it went from CPUs for our personal devices to GPUs for AI. That's where all the high interest is. It's where all the news articles go. But all the time, there have been these mature node fabs doing the things that the everyday consumer isn't thinking about. But if your mobile phone talks to the tower, well, that's because there's an antenna chip in it that allows it to talk to the tower. And the only time you wonder about that is if you can't get a connection, right? So for nations, it's this sort of infrastructure that becomes really not only really critical, but is also quite different from the bleeding edge technologies. You'll replace your laptop in a few years. You'll certainly replace your phone in a few years. But there are chips inside of the cell towers, and you don't want to replace those every few years. You want those to be identical. You want that to be the exact same chip for many years. And as you add towers, you need to have identical chips functioning in identical ways. And so mature node fabs, rather than chasing a new chip every 2 years, they're trying to perfect and hang on to a performance of a chip over quite a long time. Similarly, vision systems, that's infrastructure, but it's similar in military. A vision system for a helicopter, or guided missiles. Guess what guides the guided missile, right? And in that case, you don't want something new. You want something very, very, very stable and that's manufactured to really strict guidelines. When you get into government needs, military and aerospace, you also add on to it this really difficult, really challenging environments in which those chips are going to operate. Imagine, right? You launch a satellite, a communication satellite. You can't bring it down for a chip upgrade and then put it back in space. So that thing has to last for 20 years. Um, your nuclear arsenals, all this, they all rely on chips, and those companies are critical for infrastructure for governments, and because they're not on the mind of the public, they tend to get overlooked. Two, the industry, when you look at how the industry operates, the equipment and materials tend to progress with the bleeding edge technology. And so the equipment gets much, much more complex, much, much more expensive. And the companies that produce it take great risks. That's a lot of capital expenditure. There's a relative uniformity among the TSMCs and the Intels and the Samsungs and the SK Hynix in terms of what they need from the equipment companies. And so an Applied Materials can sell many, many, many etch PVD tools to those customers, and those tools are very much the same, not a lot of customization. But the mature node fabs, some of them are using gallium arsenide instead of silicon, or silicon carbide, or GaN on silicon, or glass, or whatever it may be, and the materials they put on, the wafer sizes, and so they're a lot more diversity among those fabs, and their margins are tighter, and they don't order 20 sets of equipment in one shot. So they become automatically a lot harder for the big equipment companies to support and work with. And we're really just kind of entering the era where a lot of smaller equipment companies are coming out with equipment for those mature node fabs, really specific to those fabs. And so that's largely the history around the challenges that mature node fabs face today. And the challenges are big.
Yes, great to know about the mature node fabs. And also, I'd like to add one thing, that the regular chips,
Please.
like those goes, I think, like LM555 IC, okay, or 741 op amp. So these are very conventional chips, and they are getting repeatedly used over time. And I think these are used in masses or maybe in huge numbers. So, and I'll point out to the basic logic gates, which is a 74XX series. So all those things. So I think I have conveyed the type of the chips. These do not need to get upgraded as per our latest technology nodes. They do not have to be 3 nanometer. They can operate and they can function in 180 nanometer or 90 nanometer or 130 nanometer. It's absolutely okay.
Absolutely.
Say we have a forehead temperature sensor, right? That in home today we have to measure the forehead temperature, right? That become popular just after the COVID.
Right.
So that thing has not to be sophisticated going in the 3 nanometer node. It will measure a temperature and it's done within few seconds. Its work is over. So it will not give a performance more than that, and we do not have expectations from that also. So I'm adding to your answer. I'm adding to the more context, so that these things also do not need to be in the high tech nodes or the highly sophisticated nodes, I can say.
Right.
Yeah. So sophisticated nodes, for that we have the processors, GPUs, NPUs, all those things. Yeah, those will be in the sophisticated node. However, like the basic things that do not need, as you have mentioned, the chips inside the cell towers, or maybe the chips inside a router, right? Router doesn't need to perform more than I think. However, the data speed will be, I think, will vary. But however, it's okay. I think people are just satisfied. We don't need right now you are sitting in the US. I am sitting in India. We have a fiber optic connection, and we are talking to each other, and the audience across the world, they are watching us. Either they are watching live. Yeah. So technology, I think we have reached a plateau where the technology is standardized already. We do not need to push everything to the 3 nanometer node.
No, and you can't. You look at a modern car, I would say like an internal combustion engine car has got, people are usually surprised, 500 or 600 chips in it. Only a handful of those are anything like leading edge. Most of them are penny sensors, MEMS sensors, yaw sensors, little temperature sensors, pressure sensors that only cost a few cents. There's no way you could build it on a 3 nanometer node. Even if you wanted to, it would cost 1,000 times that, so there is absolutely an ongoing place forever. 130 nanometer node will be with us forever.
Yes.
There's a place for it.
Yes. It's not like the movies those were released in 90s era. Now people do not watch. They are in DVDs and DVDs are in rack. No, not like that. Technology is there. It's like the sky. It's still there. If you do not look at, you cannot see. If you look at, you will see the sky. Okay, all the planets and the stars, they are there. Okay, it's like them. So everyone is rotating in their own orbit. So technology, I can bring out this analogy. If you do not look at that, even still it is there. If you do not
Still
look at
there.
Mars, yeah, Mars is still there. If you do not
Still there.
look, yeah, if you do not look at Moon is still there. If you do not look at Saturn is still there. Like that, technology the old technology loads like 180 nanometer or 130 nanometer, they are still there. If you do not look at them, yeah. So
Absolutely.
moving, yeah, great. So we'll be moving over to the next question. Mm. Could you please share some examples where vendor locking or tribal knowledge significantly hurt a fab's performance or scalability?
Yeah, and Mridul, we talked about this a little bit. First, I would say that, it's a common term, when people say tribal knowledge, I think they mean it in a negative way. In other words, it's a way to say somebody didn't share some certain knowledge and it should have been shared. Therefore, it's tribal, and therefore, when that person leaves, they take that knowledge with them. And I've even heard people accuse coworkers of concealing information and keeping information so that they can be more important to the company and they want to be indispensable. I've very rarely ever seen that. As you and I were talking about earlier in the podcast, it can be nearly impossible to really just convey all that information. Now, I think that a fab has a responsibility to its future to codify as much as you can, to take as much as you can and produce a reliable process that can be readily handed to another generation. But it nevertheless is still required some level, like you and I were saying, of tribal knowledge, of knowledge that there really isn't a way to get it out of that person's head. And I have, unfortunately, I would say the majority of my clients, I see that they have developed a major gap. They're bringing in young engineers. There's a lot of talk about, this next generation, and do they care and will they work hard? Everything I've seen, the young generation of engineers, they're very energetic. They care very, very much. They're a lot of fun to work with, but nobody, in many cases, worked with them when they showed up. They were given some training and set to work, and they don't know how to run their own fab. I'll be in a situation, I'm helping fix a defect issue, and you realize pretty quickly nobody there remembers anymore any of the development work to set their integration scheme in place, and so they know how to implement it. But when something goes wrong, they don't know anything about the space around it. They don't know how wide the process window is. They don't know when they have an issue how to even begin. And now you take a problem that with the right people, the knowledgeable people in the fab that are gone, it would have taken them a few days, and now it takes months to close. And I see a lot of that.
Yes, because as we speak, right, the human mind, we are not biological experts, but if you go to any of the uh, renowned research websites like
Mhm.
IEEE or something like that, or any other medical journal, right? If you start knowing about the human brain, how it stores information, how it retrieves information, right? It's quite complex. Honestly, I'll say I have some memories written in my mind of my childhood, long before the teenage.
Yeah.
How it's still there. Right now, I am at my 40s. How it's still there, how it still exists there. And they are very crystal clean, as if I can see
Yeah.
them.
Yeah.
So, however, if you ask me, tell us all your memories, right? I cannot certainly access them. They had to be contextual, right? We are talking about a context, and suddenly say four or five of our friends, we are discussing on something, we are maybe walking down the memory lane, we are talking, some friend says that, okay, at that time we have did something like that. Okay, I said, yeah, we did this and this happened. But that memory that came up based on a query, based on a context, Our memory
Context, yeah.
stores, yeah, very contextual. Until or unless that context is uttered and it has reached to the mind through ears, the data will not be surfaced. It will be buried deep down inside the mind. So even like the tribal knowledge, if someone accuses, but it's not in your conscious, we have a greater subconscious mind than our conscious mind. It's biologically proven, and I think many books are written. One book I can recall, The Power of Your Subconscious Mind. It's a very widely selling book, and many authors across the world wide has written on it. So even in conscious mind, right now I am talking to you, uh, both you and mine, subconscious mind, are calculating many things, even we are unaware. So we cannot have this blame game that you have kept the knowledge secret. No, that is not
Right.
true, because the conscious mind can recall up to certain things, but the subconscious mind, based on a query, on based on a context, it can pull out more informations than we can imagine. We will be surprised to explore that our mind has stored this much of information from our childhood memories, from way long ago before the teenage. How does that happen? So so in those are memories which are non-technical. Now if we come
Yes.
back to our life, if you have a technical troubleshooting memory, or any contextual memory that cannot be accessed from human mind without the context, if you do not bring down the context, subconscious mind will not pull out that data. So that is a very
Yeah.
very strange way human mind work, and we cannot do, because we are humans. We have not created ourselves. God has created
Right.
ourselves.
Right.
Only god level access can access that data. In
Right.
games, right, we have cheat codes to have the god level access, but in real life we
Yes,
don't
that's
have.
right.
We
No,
don't
we
have.
don't. No, not so far. Yeah.
Yeah. So I'll move over to the next question.
Okay.
um, we have talked about the mature nodes. Now there will
Yes.
be a critical question on that. Why are mature node fabs still underserved despite their critical role in the industry?
Yeah, and Mridul, I talked about this a little bit earlier, in that the equipment companies and all those, they aim at the bigger fabs, and it makes sense because of how many tool sets they buy, the margins, and all of that. There are more equipment companies looking, as I mentioned, to specialize around mature node fabs. One of the really key, I found this quite shocking, but it's widespread. One of the key issues that a lot of mature node fabs face, because they have such few options for equipment choices in their fab, and of course the equipment is is critical. The fab has to have production equipment inside of it, whether it's process equipment or inspection or metrology. Well, the sheer cost of the most advanced systems means that they may not be available to a mature node fab. It's simply too expensive. Even if you decide to buy that leading edge equipment for your mature node fab, it may not fit in the building. It may be too tall to go under the structure of the
Yeah.
ceiling. That's very common. Um, and then, so a lot of mature node fabs will rely on refurbished equipment, which can be a really smart decision. The cost is rather low. On top of that, they're very, very well established equipment sets with high reliability. We talk about the tribal knowledge here. When you purchase a very popular refurbished system like an Applied Materials P5000 as an example, the knowledge about that is very robust. The documentation is very robust. It was a very repeatably manufactured tool for a long time. All those things are good. You can go find recipes online. I mean, it makes it all very nice. There's a hidden danger in those refurbished equipment sets that a lot of times fabs aren't aware of until they've installed one. And it's the obsolescence of critical parts. on those systems. It may be functional parts within a process chamber. Even worse, it can be control systems. The brain of the tool, the controls for the motors and the tool itself. You may not be able to find those things because no manufacturer makes them anymore. You can't even find the board, right, the computer board. And I was really shocked to learn how many fairly prominent fabs, names that you and I would both know, that end up relying to a large degree on finding critical spares online through eBay, right? Hunting to see if they can find it at all. And that's a really deep challenge, when a piece of equipment goes down and you can't find a part to put it back online. That's truly crippling to the fab, and that's what a lot of these fabs are facing at today.
Okay, great to know about the inside story you shared.
Yes.
Even it is very good, and it will broaden the knowledge base of our viewers. And I'll move on to the next question here.
Mm-hmm.
So one of your themes is when scientific identity becomes strategic drag. Can you elaborate on how that mindset hard fabs?
Absolutely, yeah. One of the things that's true is I think I mentioned before, anything that can be made routine really should be made routine, and anything that you can institute as a straightforward how-to, like I said, even as complex as TSV integration, you should just implement what works. You should not have to reinvent. You shouldn't reinvent. And what I have encountered is that, as you said, there's in many cases too much of a scientific identity. Remember, 2 tires on the bicycle. I'm not saying take the science tire off. I'm saying leave the practical tire on the bike, the manufacturing practical tire on the bike. An example is process control. I have found that process control is a major gap in some of the fabs that I've dealt with. Now, they know all about SPC charts. They use SPC charts. They have these tools, but I think there's a sense that the tool, the SPC, is process control, and it isn't. Your behaviors and your habits and the way you operate every day, that's process control. SPC can measure it, and it can tell you that you either have control or you can't, or that you don't have control. You can get a CPK value and you can publish it, but it doesn't ever fix your problem. And so as a practical example of what I've seen, a lot of times you'll see very tight control around things that are entered into a system. So if something is typed in, a recipe, a temperature, a flow rate, if you enter a value into some sort of user interface or you twist a dial, those things get very well controlled. But I'm starting to see that the habits in between, how you go about your day, the way you prepare materials, the way you prepare a plating bath, the way you what you do with your gloves and how often you change them so that you avoid contaminating things, those don't have numbers, and those tend not to get tracked at all. And the way this comes up is, I'll encounter a fab helping them with a defect issue, and they have a sudden excursion, and I'll start asking about any changes. And of course, the answer is there were no changes. Right? Here's our table. Look, no changes. It's just physics. Something changed. No, we didn't change a single thing. And as you have more and more conversations about it, you find out that many things have actually changed. Where they drew their sample from, or how they prepared this part, or how they cleaned that, or who did it, or all these things that were slightly unstructured, and they matter. So I think in many ways, this scientific identity becomes strategic drag. When you take the tool and you replace the fundamental aspect of what you're trying to achieve, it leads to a lot of failure and prolonged complications. It's like 8D. I like 8D very much, but it is not problem solving. It's a tool for problem solvers. And I see too many times people do an 8D, and it's because they got in trouble, not because they were solving a problem. That's a bad way to go about an 8D.
Okay. Understood your point of view and the angles. So
Yeah.
I'll now move over to the next question. How can fabs balance innovation with execution efficiency? Is there a framework you suggest? Now we are talking about the factor where we are talking about innovation in a fab as well as the execution efficiency.
Yeah, because that's the challenge, right? Is you have to do both. Mike Splinter, he's a former CEO of Applied Materials, once said something that I thought was really excellent, and it's always stuck with me. I'll paraphrase, but he said, in semiconductor, in the industry, we basically put to use all that mankind has ever learned about physics, including quantum physics. Anything that we've really learned, we're using it, which is truly fascinating. It just tells you how diverse and complicated the industry is. But he said, perhaps more amazing than that is that we use all that so proficiently that you and I can afford to put these technological wonders in our pocket, that in the poorest countries, people have these incredible computers stuck in the pocket of their clothing. And I think that's the truth. And we have to do both. We have to push the bounds of physics, and then we also have to do it so repeatably that it never fails. Framework-wise, I absolutely encourage using standardized tools like SPC control charts, 8D, as much as it's possible for fabs to use lean manufacturing. I know that can sometimes be a challenge, but I strongly encourage those. But then, as you and I have talked about, fab has to be careful that it does not become a slave to its processes. The processes are there to support you in your efforts and not the other way around. When quality control procedures don't speed up the improvements of quality, it's necessary for the team to go back to each other, to go back to an understanding of what they're trying to achieve, and make sure that they haven't overlooked something. When you're developing something, you'll have phase gates. Don't let the phase gate tell you whether you're successful or not. You have to look at the actual development project itself, if something is or isn't working, and let the phase gates be a useful way to track that and not determine that. And that's the guidance I would give to, and the guidance that I do give to our fab partners and our equipment OEMs alike.
Great to know about this. And follow-up question is that how does fab treat non-unique solutions? How can the industry rethink IP and collaboration to accelerate the progress?
Yeah, well, so again, I can point to, I know I've mentioned a few times that it's come up so much lately. There's been this explosion of interest in TSV, I think because of the various gains that you can get from advanced packaging methods. And TSV was implemented, like I said, 10 years ago with an expectation that it would be broadly adopted and used widely, but it wasn't. It got used only in very niche cases. And so all of that got packed away and set aside for about 8 years. And now it's come back. It's a really good case in point where there's no need to go reinvent that. You can go partner with somebody who already knows how to do that. TSV integration is not really a great area for differentiation, even though it seems like it should be. It's incredible technology, but it's really not an area for you to differentiate in the space where you want to compete, because other companies in your space have equal access to go get it. So rather than invent, rather than try to specialize, rather than try to grow expertise internally, it makes sense to go purchase that expertise, go bring that in. And it's not just there, right? It's other integrations as well. It's in many aspects of packaging, bump formation, pillar formation. These technologies have been around for quite a while. And it would be best in most cases to just buy the knowledge and move on, so that the structure, the value in your actual differentiation, your actual device, whether it's a VCSEL or it's an RF antenna or whatever it is, that you can put your energy and focus and inventiveness toward making that the best it can, and all that supporting infrastructure on the chip you just purchase and implement. I think we're still getting there as an industry. I do really think that that's a place where India can move quickly if India can focus on what is differentiated. I think that's where you can move really quickly.
Yeah, I would like to resonate with you in the same context with a single phrase that I heard from one of my seniors, that
yes,
we don't have to invent fire, we have to know how to use it in the
yes.
point of necessity.
Yeah, absolutely. It takes too long to reinvent, and there's actually very little value in it.
Yes. Even if we today reinvent the fire, right, it will not make any difference, because the world is using the fires in a different way. The same
Yes.
thing applies here also, as you have mentioned. I have just used a very common thing. Instead of going in a deep technical, I have just used a common analogy here. So I'll move over to the next question, that how does TechSovereign Partners differ from traditional consulting firms, and in how it helps the fabs?
Yeah, so what we did, I think, is unique, because I haven't encountered anybody else doing it. I'm a little shy about the word consultant, because I think it can get maybe a little bit of a bad context. We don't have any consultants. We have a bunch of people like me. They're longtime technologists. Everybody that works with us at TechSovereign, I think every single one is more than 20 years in the industry. And what they did in their career was not consulting or teaching. You know, most of our technologists came from the equipment companies, so they did the work to develop the equipment. They were figuring out how to get, the high profile straight wall etch. They had to figure out how to do that. That's what they spent their careers doing, and how to do it without scalloping or vertical grooves at the bottom without defects. And now, because so many of them have left the industry, they took their knowledge with them. But they don't really want to golf all day or just take it easy. They always loved solving problems. And so I've created a network of these all-time experts, 20, 30, 35 years that they spent in their careers, and they want to go help solve this problem of this waning fab knowledge. And so anytime somebody asks, hey, how about, do you have an expert in wafer bonding and chip dicing? If I don't have one, I find that person in 2 days, ready to go, happy to help. Do you have an expert in RIE? Yeah, absolutely, we have that. PVD, absolutely, we have that. Modeling. We've done an incredible amount of modeling, CFD modeling, FEA. So I think that's what makes TechSovereign unique, is we didn't hire a bunch of consultants. We just have absolute experts ready to deploy for almost anything across the fab.
Yes, I got it. I actually would like to clear the concept that we have a biasing mindset. Generally, we attach a word with common things that we see around, like consultants. That means they're just consulting. But
yeah,
no, we should not be biased with the word. However, consulting means I am consulting you at this moment on a topic. Why? Because you are the topic expert. Okay. No, I'm not talking about this podcast. I'm saying that it's an example like that. Right. I'm talking to you on a particular topic. And why I'm talking to you? Because you are the expert. So I see the
Right.
consulting from that perspective. And perspective of regular company consultants, it's that somebody is hired and that person goes and have the consultation and that's all. No, not like that in context. So the context actually means a lot to action, a word, or a person. So context is very important. Okay, on what context we are having an engagement. Okay, so without any further delay, I'll move over to the next question.
Okay.
What kind of engagements or transformation have been most impactful for you and your clients?
Yeah, this one's a little bit unfortunate. What we've been finding, not in all cases, but in many, is that fabs will take a very long time before they reach out for external help, and this can be, in fighting through a really complicated defect, or in, like I said, implementing a new integration scheme. It's clear there's a reluctance to go outside. You and I talked about the IP thing, and maybe giving certain aspects too much importance within the fab, whereas otherwise you could just close it. So it has not been uncommon that we've been called in on an issue where a client has been absolutely struggling and very hard with a pretty significant issue. Might be a tool down, a system down issue, or it's a constant defect or even intermittent defect issue. And these issues cost real money and lots of money, but they'll struggle with it for weeks, months, even. And in a number of cases, in quite a few cases, not all, will get engaged and resolve the issue in a few days. We have had cases where we got on an introductory call, an issue that's had a system down for 2 or 3 weeks, and figured it out within the bounds of an hour meeting. And I tell people, I don't know if that's a reflection of how impactful we are, how much we know, or just how much opportunity there is to just make a difference. To give these fabs a break, their people are under stress and their constant burden and long hours, and it's impossible to do everything all at once. And it isn't to indicate they don't know or they're not smart enough. Even when you work with more experienced teams, or they do have a lot of experience, it's so hard to do your daily job, and then on top of that you have this monster issue you have to work through. You can bring in another expert, an outside expert like ours, and very often it's a really quick response. If I could change one thing, it would be to have fabs move a little more quickly in just closing issues out like that, because it can go so quickly.
Yeah, I would like to add one sentence to your answer, that many times when people are working in a particular setup, day and night, or maybe throughout the 365 days, okay, something will remain in their blind spot. I am
Yeah,
saying in the technical blind spot.
it does.
And when outside people looks into the matter, they are not from that close, so they don't have that blind spot like your team, you have said. So that not being inside that focal range, or inside the blind spot, you have a complete set of kind of bird's eye view kind of things about the thing, what is happening, what is not happening. And that's why it's become more easier for your team to handle the situations. Hope I
Very happy.
resonated with hope I resonated with your thoughts.
Yeah, so no, you're absolutely right. And so there's actually two modes of value that we can bring. One is that we're knowledgeable about the exact topic you're talking about, and we haven't been stressed out over it for 2 or 3 weeks. And then in our case, we're lucky that our technologists have such long experience that it's probably longer in many cases than the in-house team. Yep, absolutely.
Yeah, let's move on to the next question.
Mm-hmm.
Your team have includes veterans across the globe. How does that collective experience shape the way you solve the problems?
Yeah, our veterans know about 8D and all the rest of that, all the rest of the different tools and frameworks for solving problems. They do. They know them very well. In addition, they have that deep experience. Often they can say, "Oh, I've seen this before," and an answer can come pretty quickly. It's not the most common. Problems tend to be complex. But we also tend to have solved problems with our hands when there was no map. To get a process working in the first place is different than to get it working again. And so there's this deep fundamental knowledge of the mechanisms, and we can go straight to those. As you've said, from memory, from context, I can go back and remember, we saw something like this, and it tended to derive from issues like these. And so you can short circuit the problem solving. A lot of times teams will say, let's build a giant fishbone and run a bunch of DOEs. But we can chop that fishbone down to something small. And rather than DOEs, we can go to the mechanisms to prioritize where it's likely that an issue comes from, and solve, in not all cases, but many cases, much faster because of that.
Yes, yes, because every case is unique, and every case to case we have a different approach and solutions. Uh, and now I'll move over to the next question. Is that the loss of experienced talent is a quite crisis in the industry. How big is this problem, and what are you doing to address it?
Um, I think the problem is massive. I would anticipate that it will be a central cause for some businesses to ultimately fail, either go out of business or be bought out by another player in the industry, because the margins are getting very tight, especially among mature node fabs. The margins are very tight. So to live with an issue for longer than you need to is detrimental to making money. So I think it's a massive issue. I think for some it's going to end up being existential. What we're doing, as we've already talked about, is directly bringing knowledge back. But none of us, not me, none of our technologists want to be embedded with a fab for the next 15 years. We're not looking to replace their technology team. That's a career we already had. We're looking to take your technology team and give them tools and give them knowledge, and basically be mentors to the in-house team to make them stronger for the future. We're happy to have long-standing relationships with our clients, but TechSovereign Partners, we want them to be independent. We want them to grow. We want them to be strong customers. That's our aim.
Great. That means, let me rephrase, you want to strengthen the acceleration through your inputs.
Yes. Yeah, we do training, but our training tends to be the type of training like senior engineer to junior engineer training, where we're looking to hand off knowledge, not just go through a training course. By the way, we don't hire trainers. It's
Yes, yes,
again, it's the 20 and 30-year doers that offer our trainings.
yes, 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 yes. With that note, I'll move over to the next question. What does effective knowledge transfer look like in fabs, especially those depend on aging or undocumented processes?
Yeah, and we've talked about this a little bit as well. I think the easiest answer to that is ongoing mentorship. The mentor mentors that next generation, and then they do for the next generation. And because we've had this gap for a decade or so, I think that's going to be difficult or impossible to come by. Again, that's why we're trying to bring our experts to bear for fabs where they're suffering from a knowledge gap. it's necessary to document as much as you can. On aging equipment or older processes, there are opportunities to implement new modes of data capture and collection on those systems, that weren't available when some of those older systems were manufactured. So you can do aftermarket add-on to collect that data to get a better scope of your process. It's difficult, but I think it's necessary for some fabs to begin looking at updating some of their processes of record as well. There's a lot of situations, in the power and RF devices where they may have had a process in place for 30 years. And the chemistry is a 30 or 40-year-old formulation, and there's much better materials and chemistries and that you can use today. And I know those are expensive changes, but they get more expensive in time as opposed to less. I think it would be good foresight to begin looking at updates to many processes of record.
Great to know. And I'll move over to the next question. Is that what do you see as the biggest risks and opportunities for global semiconductor supply chains in the coming 5 to 10 years?
It is going to be tough. The supply chain is bifurcating. It's always been complex and it's always been global. And no one nation or even region had or has everything. But with the heightened concerns about technology sovereignty, you're seeing duplications of certain aspects and certain segments of the supply chain. That's going to probably introduce, I think it's clear, it's going to introduce some increases in cost. It's going to introduce some increases in discernment and risk around specification. You're in a sense qualifying, requalifying a supply chain that's already rather complex. And so that takes a lot of time and that takes a lot of money. On top of that, there really are a lot of aging equipment sets, and there really is this kind of ongoing obsolescence of key components. You can find components that are much better, but they're not backward compatible, and so better can't be had. And there will be a major cost to dealing with those challenges for a lot of fabs that work on pretty small margins.
Okay, great to have the answer from your side, and hope this is not only for me, this is for the viewers also who are watching the TSP live or maybe watching it as an action replay later on. So I'll move over to the next question. And if you were advising a government or national champion starting a semiconductor initiative today, what would your top 3 recommendation would be?
I would definitely put focus into, we've talked about training a lot. I 100% behind training, front wheel of the bike. I would absolutely, as a government, make sure that you promote training and coursework in semiconductor industry. Wherever possible, implement semiconductor infrastructure at the universities. That's growing quite a lot as far as I can see. I can tell you in North America, many universities were rather slow to implement that infrastructure, and now are catching up very quickly. A lot of money is being spent to put world-class clean room facilities into some of the major universities, and then even the smaller ones are doing what they can to give students hands-on in what it takes to get an etch to look like you want it to, that kind of thing. So I strongly encourage that. I have also seen there are companies who do highly emphasize mentorship, even to the point where they talk apprenticeships. And those, putting a label on something doesn't necessarily make it what you're saying, but a genuine heart of apprenticeship in a company or even in the broader industry would work wonders. You have to have those journeymen, those masters of their trade to pass that down. And that can be pretty hard to come by in industries that are sort of starting greenfield to go become experts. And so the third thing I'd strongly recommend is partnering with existing knowledge bases, practical knowledge bases, and bringing in third party, bringing in groups who have been there, do know how these things work, and so that you can fast forward all that growth. Not only fast forward that growth, but cement that knowledge into the hands of that new workforce, which of course is the aim. And it seems like this is what India's approach is. As I monitor where India is going, it seems like collectively, this is also hard to find, right? You've got the private sector, the public sector, and government that seem to be working together very closely in India, which I think is really exciting because it's very hard to do even when you want to, and it seems like that's gone very well.
Yes, yes. It's a complex set of gears that moves in any nation, right? If someone wants to do something, right, there are a lot of gears has to move along with the gear himself as a person or as a company. So all the gears have to be well lubricated so that they move in the same speed, as well as their grooves should be matching. That means if I take 2 steps, the adjacent gear should also take the very similar or mapped steps. So like that, gears move, right, in a gearbox, right? So that's a very necessary thing to move everything together.
It's hard.
Yeah, it's hard. I know it's hard, and people also have to understand the philosophy of the gearbox. Like the industry, if you look at the industry, right? If I bring this analogy, the industry is like a gearbox. Even there is a junior engineer, senior engineer, they are the part of the gear. They are themselves a gear. The CEO, CXO level people, they are the gears, which are bigger gears, which are having the interface to the outside world, like with the government or other companies and other parts of the ecosystem. Because the world of VLSI or the semiconductor cannot be operated by a single-handed company. It has to work with multiple companies, multiple technologies together, and along with multiple expertise, right? So that all that complex gear moving together itself, in realistically, it is very hard. And realistically, that has to go in a proper synchronous moves so that
Yes.
the all gears move together.
And you need to stick with it.
Yes,
Quite a
the
long time.
yes, the synchronicity is the challenge. The synchronicity,
It is.
as well as the lubricity, I can say, if they are well lubricated to move, so that none of the gears have rust. Okay, everything is cleaned and they are well lubricated and they are moving along one step at a time with the adjacent gear. So that's very complex for the entire VLSI and the semiconductor ecosystem. The very first video of this channel was about the VLSI ecosystem and how complex is the interaction of all the different companies there. I started this channel for the freshers, sharing the industry grade knowledge by sharing through the PPT slides and infographics and all. And that was the first video I made, because when you are thinking, you might have seen through an angle, or maybe you have seen through a keyhole towards the VLSI world, but it's a vast, and there are a lot of gears are moving together. So it's quite complex, and the synchronicity among the gears, that means I'm referring them as gear. Gear could be a person, or gear could be a company, or it could be a higher level person, or the government, or the ministry. Gears is a kind of analogy that has to move synchronously, have to be well oiled, to be well lubricated, and they can move on synchronously. That's a challenge and realistical challenge. Yes, I'll move over to the next question. Is that and before moving, I'd like to say we have some of the comments which we will display at last 10 minutes after I am finished
Okay.
with the question with John. So yeah, I'll move over to the next question. What do you see as the biggest risk and opportunities for the global semiconductor supply chains in the next 5 to 10 years?
I think we covered that one.
We covered that, right? So I'll move on to the
Yeah, we
next one.
covered that one.
Yeah, lot of questions are there. If you are advising government or national champion starting a semiconductor initiative today, what would your top three recommendation would be? I think we also covered this one, right?
I think that
Yeah,
was the previous question. Yeah. Too
yeah,
many good
yeah,
conversations here.
yeah. So the final question, I'll go.
Final question. Yeah.
Finally, what advise you to give you the young engineers or fab leaders trying to make meaningful change in this complex and fast moving industry?
Yeah. I would embrace the tools that are available to you. The front tire on the bike. I would also highly encourage remain curious. There's semiconductor is still a space of exploration and learning. Even in the mature node fabs, the things you can learn in this industry are fascinating. They're in, they blow your mind, the things that you encounter, the things that you get to be a part of. I At class one, we had a very successful internship program, brought a lot of interns in, and over the course of a summer, we'd do everything we could to bring them up to speed. This is where I encountered a lot of genuine mentoring and bringing somebody up to speed. And by the end of the summer, they're presenting their project to a really important customer, a fairly major fab on their own. It's a 19 or 20-year-old person, and they had the confidence. And it's because even though it's very complex semiconductor manufacture, it's actually accessible. The know-how is there, and so take the opportunity to learn, remain curious, be inspired by all the things that you can learn on top of the structure that you have to implement and the tools that you really do need to implement. But if you can be curious and energized about getting to be in this industry, you can increase your expertise very, very quickly. Seek mentors wherever you can, and that's at every level. I've 27 years I've been in the industry. I have key people in my life that I constantly go to ask their advice or their input. And even when there's a limited amount of senior level engineers, which is often the case, there are mentoring opportunities if you go seek them out. They're not offered, go find them, right? Go invite yourself in. And that I would give to both the new entries into the industry and even managers in the industry to remain curious and keep trying to grow. There's so much enjoyable opportunity that we have here.
Yeah, we had a nice session today, and a lot of viewers connected to our session today. Now,
Good.
so I'll show the comments. I think these are not questions, just comments. I'll show first comment here. Here, Vivekanandan said that yep, like the TV remote, they don't have to be get compressed. So this
Right.
came when we were discussing about the mature nodes, right? We are talking about the LM555 IC and the 741 op amp, all those things. So this came in that context. So I hold it for the last few minutes. I think people are also doing agree. And yes, the TV remote don't have to get to the 3 nanometer. So I will disappear
No,
it.
they don't.
Yeah. So good that people related with their daily lives. And now there is another comment from the same viewer. Our Indian government is now only looking out on the semiconductor industry. I think it came during the last couple of questions. We forgot about this field from the last 2 decades. By the way, it needs a lot of capital. So here I would like to comment one thing that
Mhm.
India was mostly used as the service sectors. So for last couple of years,
Right.
um, myself also worked in the VLSI industry. in couple of companies, and as well as they are with their client and customers. So what I see that the Indian database of work power was mostly were utilized as the service engineers mostly,
Hmm.
and the designs were made elsewhere. Now, what is going on in the Indian semiconductor sectors, that with the DLI scheme, designs will be there and they will be manufactured. Like today, we have our expert John. Today, we have our expert John, who is from the uh, materials. That means the fabs. He has his expertise over years, and he has his teams. Like because the design is one thing that you can do with the EDA tools, but ultimately that has to land on the silicon wafer, and that is the most critical part. And that's why in this Tech Simplified TV podcast, that is the TSP, the Semiconductor Podcast, we are having multiple guests from multiple areas of the VLSI industry. We had guests from the design, we had guests from the tools, we had guests from the fabs, and a lot of guests were there. Some guests were from the embedded, so lot of. And I'd like to comment one thing, that now what is happening in India is that that we are moving out of the service, and we are trying to do the designs. First of all, designs means you are doing the designs by hand. So if you look at the basic series that is ongoing right now, generally we have theoretical as well as tool level. So we are going through the LT Spice series, where we can design a circuit and these things. These are the for the very basic level students. It's bridging the gap, right, between your textbook as well as to the software and the industry knowledge. Now this has to go in more deep, like designing a IC741, designing a 555 timer IC, and like that. So all those has things to be get designed and finally has to land on the semiconductor chip, get packaged, and then sell in the market to be used in the PCBs. Even I would like to say we had a PCB expert a few episodes ago.
Hmm.
Yeah, and John is the foundry expert, and he has worked in fabs, right? So we have a lot of expertise here. I'll disappear this comment. And Vivekanandan has said, yes, that's right, service force. Yes. So that perspective has to get changed. And we are having this TSP here because a single person cannot cover the all knowledge. I started this channel. Started and executed multiple set of educational series. However, up till a point, I realized that that cannot serve the entire thing, whatever going on today. Now that Semiconductor Podcast is bringing up the guests who are expert in their own fields. And as I have mentioned, that this VLSI and the semiconductor industry is a complex set of gears. They need to move smoothly, synchronously, and with multiple expertise. That means one gear is there with the designer, one gear with the fab, one gear must be in the chip and packaging, one gear would be the PCB. Right? There are a lot of things there. So everything has to be hand on hand. Everything has to move synchronously. So that is the criticality, and that's why we are beaming this the Semiconductor Podcast (TSP), and to bring real people. Today we have our guest, overseas guest. He is from USA. He has connected from USA, and we are having this conversation. And our viewers, like Vivekanandan, they are watching him live. Now we are utilizing the technology to boost the technology. That is one thing. You have two choice. Either you go for Instagram reel, you spend your time, waste your energy in spending technology for your time wastage, or you can use the technology to boost your technical mind, to boost the
Right.
technology in your work. And that's what we are doing through this podcast. And it's a serious thing because every person has their unique journey, and we reach out to our guest in a way that we can bring a wide spectrum, like a VIBGYOR spectrum. We can give a VIBGYOR spectrum of the entire VLSI and semiconductor industry. So that the students who are there, who will be the tomorrow's workforce, they can at least have the real time live interaction, and they can listen from the persons who have really hands-on worked on the system. Like we have guest John today, he has shared a lot of perspectives, lot of in-depth things. Now, if we go today at deep technical, no one will understand. We will not go in deep technical because the deep technical requires your work to be in some place or in some company where these experts can come and solve your problem, mentor you, and that's all. However, just to get a overview, having a bird's eye view through the TSP is very important. Books can be topic based. Books can be even one author can write multiple books, but it is absolutely impossible to create all the books needed for the entire VLSI industry.
Mm-hmm.
That's why the TSP is there to bring in real person who can speak about their experiences, their views, a lot of things. And we have a live session here so that they can comment, the viewers can comment. And in the past couple of episodes, our guests have answered difficult and critical questions also. Hope you have liked the podcast, today's episode. And thank you, John, for coming to the podcast and making the TSP, that is the Semiconductor Podcast, enrich podcast for the entire VLSI community. Thank you. And since we do not have any more questions or queries from the viewers, we'll conclude today's show here. So I'll end the live streaming here.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you, John. Bye-bye.